Hey, it's Lou, and here's the thing. America's teachers are running out of patience. In February 2018, West Virginia's K-12 educators went on strike, sparking a movement that has swept across the nation and bridged ideological divides. Teachers in Oklahoma, Kentucky, Arizona, and North Carolina all engaged in strikes or protests in 2018. This year, school employees in Los Angeles, Oakland, and Denver, among other locales, got in on the action. Poor pay and rising healthcare costs are at the center of this activism, but this isn't just about money. Teachers say the future of public education is at stake. The rise of charter schools and how they get funded is a particular point of contention. And underneath all of this is a single big existential question. What does America's treatment of our teachers say about our values? Teachers are underpaid, and here are the numbers to prove it. According to a report from the Economic Policy Institute, America's K-12 teachers make 11.1% less in wages and benefits than do similarly educated people in other careers. This is called the teacher's pay penalty. In addition, while most college graduates have seen modest wage increases in the last few decades, teacher salaries have actually declined by $27 a week between 1996 and 2017 when you adjust for inflation. This salary squeeze and related contraction of educational resources accelerated during the Great Recession, and compensation never really recovered. In 2015, 29 states were still spending less per student than they did in 2008, despite the fact that many of them were no longer strapped for cash. In fact, 7 of the 12 states with the largest cuts in general school funding since 2008 managed to lower income tax rates in recent years. Sylvia Allegretto, a labor economist at the University of California, Berkeley, told me that the wizards of Wall Street blew up the economy, but public sector employees had to pay for it. To quote that EPI report she co-authored, spending cuts are not the result of weak state economies. Rather, state legislatures have enacted them to finance tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations. Michael Hansen, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, told me that teachers sort of grinned and bore this reality for quite some time. But as President Trump started to boast about the greatest economy in history, as wages in some industries picked up and tax cuts were handed out, teachers started to wonder, where's my piece of the pie? In addition, Jay O'Neill, an 8th grade teacher in West Virginia, told me he expected his take-home pay to decrease in 2018 because healthcare costs were going up and the state was passing along the cost to teachers, even asking them to wear Fitbits. If the teachers didn't log enough steps, their individual healthcare contributions would increase, according to reports. Hansen added, importantly, that not all public school teachers are experiencing the same economic hardships. Some municipalities have been generous with their educators. Overall, the average teacher's salary in the U.S. is $59,660, according to the National Education Association. O'Neill told me he knows that teachers aren't the only group that are underpaid, and he hopes other civil servants are inspired by the teacher strikes. However, the teacher movement isn't just about paychecks. Hansen noted that besides compensation, there are a number of other factors that push teachers out of the classroom and into the streets. They felt micromanaged by things like the Common Core curriculum and standardized tests that can be connected to their compensation. Other education activists have pointed to deteriorating facilities, shortened work weeks, outdated materials, and inadequate support staff as reasons they've walked out. But besides these specifics, there's also a broader concern. Many teachers feel public education itself is under attack as charter schools are gaining ground and getting preferential treatment from legislators. Now, most charter schools are held to different standards than public schools, different curriculums, different approaches, different priorities. But this isn't merely a philosophical battle. Money is on the line because in many states, school funding is linked to enrollment. So when students leave a public school and enter a charter school, public money goes with them. One recent report found that charter schools take $57.3 million a year from public schools in Oakland, where there was recently a teacher strike. Aaron McHenry-Sorber, an assistant professor in higher education at West Virginia University, told me that when public schools lose students to charter schools, you might think their expenses decline because they have fewer students. But she explained that public schools often don't shed enough students to justify firing teachers or support staff or cutting back on essentials such as heating and building maintenance. On the other hand, proponents of charter schools believe parents should have a choice in where to send their children. They argue that public education in the U.S. has fallen behind what's available in other developed countries. For instance, according to a 2015 Pew study, the U.S. ranked 19th in science and 30th in math out of 35 industrialized nations. Therefore, charter school supporters say innovation and new approaches are necessary. Algredo told me that public schools definitely have issues that need to be addressed, but A, politics have contributed to these problems, and B, charter schools essentially make no effort to fix things. Instead, charter school proponents work on building a new system from scratch. She compared to constructing an expensive new railway line right next to one that could be fixed for a lot cheaper. It's important to note that only a small number of charter schools are for-profit, about 15% according to an advocacy group for charter schools. But some technically nonprofit charter schools contract out services like school lunch and security. In other words, money that traditionally flows to public sector employees is being redirected to the private sector. And the private sector isn't necessarily more generous. In fact, charter school teachers tend to get smaller salaries. More importantly, there's mixed evidence about whether or not charter schools actually serve students more effectively. Okay, so you have this cluster of complaints: stubbornly low pay, inadequate resources, standardized testing, charter schools, etc. At the same time, you have this broader trend of political activism in the US. McHenry Sorbert said many of these movements, Me Too, Time's Up, the Women's March, center around women. The teaching profession is largely female. 77% of K-12 public school educators were women as of the 2015-2016 school year, so there's a connection to what was going on in the cultural zeitgeist. Teachers were inspired to join the growing body of activists, and once it got going, one teacher strike influenced another. Dina Rollinger, a professor of sociology at Florida State University, told me that one of the remarkable things about the teachers movement is that teachers are a pretty politically diverse group, yet they've been able to bridge their differences and rally around their profession. O'Neill, one of the West Virginia organizers, told me his group would delete posts about Trump from the comment section of their Facebook page, both the good and the bad. They'd message people, hey, you can believe whatever you like about the president, but we're trying to avoid politically divisive speech. This inclusiveness was a winning strategy. In addition, Rebecca Tarlow, an assistant professor of education and labor and employment relations at Penn State, told me these striking teachers astutely framed all of their complaints as issues that impact the whole community, not just teachers, but also the students they serve and the society that benefits from a well-educated population. As one organizer in Oklahoma said, quote, yes, I'd like a raise, but I'm mad because you're getting a crappy education and you should be too. This is a point that O'Neill underscored. He told me that when teachers have to get second jobs, it impacts their classroom performance. They're tired, they're stressed, they're less able to focus on the task at hand. McHenry Sorbert added that when schools die, the community around it often dies too. That's especially the case in rural areas where schools are de facto town squares. Therefore, the striking teachers in places like West Virginia and Oklahoma were able to find allies outside of the profession. All the experts I spoke to noted that by and large, the protests have moved from red states to blue states. The 2019 wave of strikes and demonstrations are also demanding more beyond the classroom. In Los Angeles, striking teachers called for immigration services for students and their families. In Oakland, meanwhile, the teachers linked their activism to racial justice.
This failure to fully fund our schools at the levels our students deserve is undeniably a racial justice issue in a school district that is overwhelmingly students of color.
I wondered if this broadening of the movement's goals would ostracize potential supporters. But Rollinger told me that while these issues may be controversial across the nation, they have widespread support in urban California. In other words, another example of organic coalition building. All told, throughout these past 13 months, teachers have won a number of pay raises and other concessions, i.e., the strikes have worked. Rollinger told me the demonstrations have put politicians in a tough spot. The strikes have broad public support, so denying teachers better pay and better working conditions would be a political nightmare. It might get them chased out of office. And all this got me thinking, why did it take protests and strikes and demonstrations for these issues to be resolved? Yes, balancing a budget is a tricky affair, But surely public education ought to be a top priority. After all, our politicians and cultural figures often wax poetic about teachers and deliver easy applause lines about their virtues and sacrifices. Look at political advertising and you'll see educators used as props alongside nurses, firefighters, police officers, and blue-collar types in hard hats. But in the absence of real action, this attention is exploitative and condescending. Words and slogans are easy. Money is what matters. O'Neill told me if society truly valued educators, they'd show it by paying them more. I know some teachers feel uncomfortable with that. You hear words like vocation and self-sacrifice surround the profession. You hear the refrain, no one became a teacher to get rich. Okay, fair enough, but no one became a teacher to go broke either. And when you combine low pay with the rise in student debt, it's going to be a challenge to convince qualified people to make their careers in classrooms. There's already a teacher shortage in states across the country, particularly in math and science. So if we continue to take teachers for granted, we're going to run out of them. And then we become less competitive on the world stage. And then everyone suffers. Okay, I'm going to go live my life.
As teachers, this is such an important moment for us. People don't see how much our kids lack. We see that every day. This is a moment where maybe the city is going to get a little glimpse of how much this country has robbed our kids.